Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences from some of the greatest coaches in the world. I'm Michael Kurkowski, so grateful for you joining me today. And if you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to support the show. All right, let's dive in. Here we go.
All right, and we are live. Welcome back, Dr. Michael Hartle. How are you?
Well, it's great to be here, sir. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really honored to have you come back. It's been a minute since you came on here, but I got a chance to work with you. I think like maybe a month and change ago at a workshop, and just absolutely loved learning from you. So I really appreciate you taking time and jamming with me today.
Well, you did a great job at that workshop, mister. So you did fantastic. So I appreciate you coming in and sharing your knowledge with all the students there.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. We really got to dive deep into just really the clean and press and the snatch, which for me, like, I don't know about you, but I love just taking one or two elements and just going into a layer or two deeper. I always felt like I learned better that way rather than just doing a million different things in a workshop and then maybe you take one or two things away. I found that when you go deep for a few hours on like one specific thing, I just always get so much more out of that.
Yeah, I do too. And I always like to say I'm always a student because back when Pablo and I created the SFL back in 2013, you know, I knew barbell lifting because I spent 20 years competing in powerlifting. So I knew not just the 3 power lifts, but all the other accessory exercises and everything with that. But I also learned more from teaching other people, watching, you know, their bodies go through movements and motions and all that stuff. And then also with the kettlebell too. So, you know, that's one of the reasons, kind of the impetus to when I wrote my book about kettlebells, that kind of like I had some current students at the time. So I told them, I said, you guys are my guinea pigs. So, but I learned from that. So even though I may be one of the instructors, I'm also a student at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the evolution of learning, right? It's like first you can learn everything about it from the technical standpoint, but then you practice it and you apply it yourself. And then really the third step is, can you teach somebody else or work with somebody else on it? And I think that's why it's great to practice it solo, but to get in with a group of people and then teach them, you're only in your own body, right? You only know your architecture and how something works for you. And at the beginning, you think that, oh, well, this is the way to do it, until you get somebody who's completely different than you. Maybe you have somebody who's super short or somebody with really long femur. All of a sudden they move very differently. So how to apply those principles and get something out of that person, that goes into a whole nother realm.
You got it. You got it.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about today with you, Doc, is a few different things. I mean, one, you've been a teacher and a clinical practitioner for so many years. So I really want to get into the evolution of thought with you, things that you've learned along the line. And then also there's also some specific questions that I've always got from people about why kettlebell training and like what is this exercise working on. And I always felt like I never had a great answer to that. Like I can kind of explain it, but it feels very long-winded. And I know with your book, Kettlebell Strength Training Anatomy, that just came out, you go into a lot of like what muscles, what tendons are actually working in these exercises and how that applies. So that's kind of a little framework of as the audience, what you can get from this conversation. And just like any podcast, it's going to go any different direction as it rolls forward of going in. But I want to start with the book that came out here, Kettlebell Strength Training Anatomy. So how did this book come together? Like, what is your process when putting together a book like this, like your writing process? Are you someone who you do it like one chapter at a time, or did you kind of have the whole idea of the book first in your head and then kind of broke it down? What's your process like of putting something like this together?
Well, the interesting idea was not necessarily mine. It was Michelle Earle of Human Kinetics. She's a senior acquisitions editor there, great lady. I had written a chapter for Dr. Craig Levenson's book called Rehabilitation of the Spine. It was, I think, chapter 26 on using barbell training to help spare the spine, which sounds kind of, usually think barbell training will hurt the spine, but you can actually use it to make your spine stronger and more resilient. She read that chapter. She contacted me and said that we want to put together a kettlebell book. If you notice through Human Kinetics, they have a library where they have a lot of anatomy books, but they're doing like body weight strength training anatomy. They do hockey anatomy. They do soccer. They do yoga anatomy. So they have a lot of these books which are somewhat similar to mine that in the drawings and stuff like that. We'll cover that in a few minutes. But so she contacted me, and so we worked through it, and then we basically kind of put together an outline. So it kind of fell, being a former engineer and being organized like I do, I put together, like this last weekend, I had a huge assignment due. I'm going to get my PhD in exercise science. So I had a huge assignment due. So when you look at the whole assignment, I'm like, oh, this is going to take forever. But then I just broke it down section by section. All of a sudden, I'm done. Whoa, that was quick.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do this, when you break things down into smaller parts, you get them through a lot faster than that. So we broke it down. We made up the first design to 10 chapters. And then we had the titles of each chapter. So then I started putting a chapter together. Some chapters took longer than others.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the mobility chapter didn't take too long because those are things I practice almost on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
The kettlebell swing, because the kettlebell swing is kind of the, as Mark Rifkin says, the center of the kettlebell universe. We wanted to make sure everything was right with that. So we took a long time to design that and write it. And I even added some extra swing exercises in there that are not in the Strong First curriculum. Like, for example, doing kettlebell swings with the kettlebell outside your legs. When I first got involved with kettlebells, before I got my first kettlebell certification with Pavel, a trainer that I was working with taught me that. And I thought, those are great exercises. So you know what the suitcase deadlift is, where you just, one kettlebell. Well, think of a suitcase swing in a sense, and not a suitcase. You don't swing suitcases, but you're swinging one kettlebell outside your leg. So it's an asymmetrical lift. It's very similar to the one we learn as far as a one-hand kettlebell swing, but it's outside your leg. So you're even having more center of mass going outside your own center of mass, which means you have to work even harder to do that. So again, anyway, so we kind of spent a lot of time doing that. So I put all the chapters together, sent them into her, and as I got a chapter done, I sent it to her, and then their editors were working on it, editing it based on that. So then they sent it to me for questions, and then I sent it back. So we went about 2 or 3 different editing rounds back and forth. There was a few times where in my mind, as I'm writing this book, I'm trying to, in a sense, kind of model Pavel's writing. Pavel writes very simplistically.
Yes.
And he tends to be and it's a little bit of kind of a smart ass sometimes in some of the things that he says, but he's being truthful when he says that, and so I did that. And so they say, well, can we reword that sentence or two? No, we're keeping that sentence that way. Because I didn't want to like take one sentence and turn it into 5 sentences.
Right.
Because it's very self-explanatory, that one sentence. And if you know Pavel, that's the way he writes. So, but anyway, so we did that. And then they came to my gym at my clinic, and then we took a bunch of photographs. We had 3 models, 1 female, 2 male. And we took a bunch of photos of doing the exercises. And then a medical illustrator was hired to actually take the photos and draw the primary and secondary muscles that I listed in the book. Now, one thing I always want to caution people when they look at the book, buy the book for the exercises. The anatomical drawings are the bonus or the icing on the cake that you get. It's not for, it's the book is not designed to make you an anatomist. It's not designed to make you have your, PhD in anatomy. It's just designed to help. So when they asked me to write the primary and secondary muscles, I called Michelle and I said, Michelle, there's really not one muscle in your body you're not using during kettlebells.
Right.
But that applies even to body weight training. That applies to barbell. That applies to playing hockey. So again, but she said, all right, well then write the most common ones that are primary, the most common ones that are secondary. So for example, kettlebell swing, gluteus maximus, hamstrings, core. 3 areas which are usually highly primary with that, but you're still using your gastroc, your soleus. You're still using your flexi digitorum superficialis in your forearm. You're still using, as far as your SCM, you're still using your traps. So you're using all those muscles, but those are more secondary muscles compared to the primary muscles. When you do a heavy kettlebell swings, you're going to feel it in your buttocks, your hamstrings, and your core generally the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think that's an interesting thing, because I've said so much of when people are like, well, what does this work? It's like, well, it's a total body exercise. And I almost feel cringy saying that, just because I think it's so overused of like, oh, it's total body. It's like,
right.
But it is the truth of it. But it's like, there are some that do work a little bit more than others. Like you are going to, maximize, your glute work. You're also going to maximize your hamstrings, your core and stuff like that. But it is going to work on your upper body a little bit. Maybe it is secondary type stuff. So the visuals of this kind of accentuate that a little bit more. That's what you're
Right.
saying.
So, for example, you remember the old videos, buns of steel, abs of steel. Okay, if someone came to you and say, "Hey, I want to build strong buttocks, beautiful looking buttocks," would you give them a kettlebell getup? Most likely not. You'd probably do some kettlebell deadlifts and kettlebell swings.
Right.
But the getup still works it. It just doesn't work it as strongly as the kettlebell swing or deadlift does.
Exactly.
But let's say someone wanted to work on their shoulder mobility and they do work a job where they have to use their hands above their head quite a bit. The getup would be one of the primary exercises. That and the press, that and the snatch are some overhead exercises that you would give that person because you want to make them more resilient to increase their performance at work and also to decrease their injury potential.
Yeah. It's funny reading Pavel's work. It is so simplistic, but it's also so in depth of it.
Yeah.
Like I always feel like I have to go back and reread it again, especially when he gets into all of the formulas and stuff like that, like the math aspect of it. It's always like, where are we going with this on it? But it's a very simplistic way. So, oh, that's awesome. Is it an enjoyable process of writing something like this? Like, obviously, I'm sure there's challenging times from it and stuff, but was it a labor of love?
Oh yeah, definitely a labor of love. I mean, I was glad when I was done, when the final edits were done, and you just kind of went, okay, I'm done with that now, and now we're just waiting for the book to be printed. It was like all of a sudden I had this hole in my life where I had all this time, because obviously I'm a full-time doctor. I teach for Strong First. I write this book, and then halfway through it, I was decided I got a harebrained idea to get my PhD. So then I started going to school for that. So that was a little bit more involved than I anticipated in the initial beginning. So there were some chapters that got kind of put on hold when I had a huge assignment due, and it took me 3 or 4 days to do that assignment because I do that homework at night when I'm not at work. And of course, being an empty nester, I had plenty of time to do that, but still, so some chapters took a little bit longer to do it, and I apologize profusely to Michelle, and she was very gracious and understanding. So she's one of my favorite people in this world. She's a nice lady. So
Yeah. It's powerful to have an editor and somebody that can, be there with you on that because it can be a very solid, you know, it's a work of solitude in many ways from there. So you need a team around you on
right.
that. So, well, one thing, like kind of looking at it in an anatomy perspective, I've always I think the kettlebell is a superior tool in some ways to other areas of it, but I don't want to be biased in saying that just from the experience that I had. But in an anatomy perspective, do you see the kettlebell as a better tool? Like, does it give more an advantage for the the overall human being of working it if they're looking for a total body and athletic approach, let's say to a dumbbell or a barbell?
Well, and I'm going to answer this question. I'll use Stu McGill's phrase, and I always quote him on this. It depends,
Yeah.
because if I'm out, like when I played semi-pro football for 10 years. So as a defensive tackle, I was usually getting double teamed from offensive linemen. So I had a 300-pound guy, another 300-pound guy trying to move me. So I had 600 pounds of, I call it man meat, trying to move me out of the way. So kettlebells improve my strength endurance, improve my conditioning to be able to play 3+ hours out in 90-degree heat out here, humidity, and with that. But I still needed to use a barbell because I needed to be able to back squat or front squat a certain amount of weight so that my body was resilient, so I could go play after play after play. I had many guys in those 10 years that would fall down and roll into my knee, and of course we've seen in the NFL that sometimes that will just take out your MCL and your ACL, and I walked away with no injuries. And I think part of that is all the powerlifting I did before the football, but also during football. I did lots of heavy back squats. So, for example, if I took two beasts, which are 48-kilo kettlebell, 106 pounds each, if I do a double kettlebell front squat, 212 pounds, that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Just to hold the kettlebells there. But I needed to be able to front squat 400 pounds to enhance my football training. So that's where I turned to the barbell for that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I turned back to doing heavy kettlebell swings to help my condition. I turned to heavy kettlebell get-ups to help the shoulder mobility and my thoracic rotation aspect, in addition to the core muscles. So I combined both the barbell and the kettlebell for football. Now, If I was a distance runner, kettlebells probably be perfectly fine with that. You can also do some barbell
Mhm.
stuff with that. If I was a wrestler or MMA fighter, kettlebells are probably one of the best things. I mean, people like Mike Perry, who trains a lot of MMA guys, he can probably speak to that more than I can. He's more of an expert in that. But
Mhm.
again, I would say kettlebells would probably be there because kettlebells in that regard would be a secondary training tool to the primary training tool of learning how to wrestle, grapple, and take guys down
Right.
and either do an arm bar or whatever else to get them to submit.
Mhm.
So in that regard, so I guess it depends on what your goal is.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry for that being kind of more of a general answer there, but again, it just now one thing about kettlebells, and Jeff Newport will speak to this as well too. Um, Kettlebells obviously afford a very quick workout. So I had put together a half-hour program back when I was playing football that I'd be done with that half hour, and my hands would be on my knees, and I'd be breathing heavy. A
Yeah.
half hour. Now, back to back squat when I was competing in powerlifting, that half hour was the length of time it took to do my work sets of back squat.
Right.
It's one exercise. So there's a difference as far as the training thing, but I felt great after doing that half hour. I felt like I was improving my strength and endurance tremendously because I was pushing. My heart rate was getting up there. My conditioning was getting up there. So again, it depends. So
Yeah. No, I think it's a perfect answer. I mean, obviously, when we're getting it, it does depend on that. But have you seen, there was a meme that I saw that I absolutely loved from, I forget who first started it, but someone said, like, oh, my friend's starting kettlebell training. And he said, I picked up 32 kilograms because that's my warm-up set for bench press. And it was like, it's like, okay, but like, it's anybody in the kettlebell world knows, yeah, that's a much different animal. If you're looking at conditioning
yes,
with double
yes,
32s on there, it is not a bench press. It is very different when you start getting into the conditioning realm from there. I think everybody's got that story of being very humbled with a kettlebell, specifically coming from a strength background
right.
from the conditioning standpoint, but also the strength and mobility standpoint from there as well.
I agree. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I mean, the barbell is such a phenomenal tool, but if you're looking at it from a athletic perspective of like something like MMA, where maybe you don't need as much brute strength as you would maybe like football or rugby or something like that, you think kettlebells would probably be a first tool to maybe master or really get efficient with first before going into something like a barbell?
I would say definitely when you're in season training, yes. Because in season training, if I'm playing football or soccer, as I say, my main goal is to improve my soccer play, be sport specific for that. I'd want to use the kettlebells as a secondary tool to help keep my conditioning up, keep my strength up, keep my tendons strong, my ligaments strong for as far as the forces that can happen during a football game or a soccer game. During off season, though, recommend they actually do combine barbell and kettlebell together in the
Mhm.
off season. So if I was a strength coach, I'd probably have a team like that. I'd probably recommend, in season, do kettlebells. It's quick and easy because again, your goal is to be a better soccer player, not to be a kettlebell lifter.
Right.
But I still want to use kettlebells, and it's quick and easy. Like I said earlier, I put together a half-hour program. It worked great for me. You can put together a 45-minute program and be done. So you're just on, as they call it in England, I think they call it the pitch, the field. When you're on the pitch, you're doing that kind of stuff. And then after that, you can go and do a half-hour kettlebell stuff, do some training, and then go or do it before do the pitch training and do it afterwards. So again, I would do it as far as a secondary aspect there. But off season, I would definitely add some other things. Even some body weight exercises would be great too.
Yeah. Have you found in your experience from coaching from both on the barbell side and the kettlebell side, is one easier for the majority of people to get the technique down and understand more from just an athletic perspective? Like, is it easier to teach the barbell lift or the kettlebell lifts? Have you seen one kind of like build up more than the other?
And okay, I'm gonna refer back to Stu again. It depends. So, and I think it largely depends on the coach and how they teach. So remember, I started powerlifting when I was 18 years of age. So there was no kettlebells around at that point. There were dumbbells and that stuff. So I learned how to do, barbell training. I didn't know anything about kettlebells until after retiring from powerlifting. And then I took my first kettlebell cert with Pavel.
Mhm.
And so some of the moves, like the front squat, was very similar, just that holding the bells up here versus holding the barbell here with the front squat were somewhat similar. So the ankle action, the knee action, the hip action were very similar with that regard. But again, things like when Pavel said we're going to teach the kettlebell armbar, at that point, MMA was starting to kind of get going in the United States. I'm thinking armbar, you're not doing that to my shoulders.
Right.
I got good shoulders. I'm not going to do. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's what he's talking about. So
the
the
same
armbar,
name, totally different approach. Yeah.
exactly. And the armbar is a great mobility exercise, and I recommend it to a lot of patients. But again, it's just one of those things where, yeah, it definitely, I would say teaching it is, it also depends on the mindset and the athleticism of the patient, or sorry, the client, patient, student, whatever you got there. If you got someone like get Grandma Jones who's say 63 years old and comes in and she's 50 pounds overweight and wants to move, then I just start them with the kettlebell. I usually rarely ever start anyone anymore with the barbell, because the kettlebell is a non-intimidating, or not as intimidating as a 7-foot piece of steel known as the barbell. Say, hey, we're gonna do some barbell deadlifts today. Like, oh my God, it's gonna hurt my shins and all this other kind of stuff, and be too much weight. But if I take a 12-kilo kettlebell and put it in the ground, I said, we're gonna teach you how to deadlift that. They're like, oh, okay. So they tend to dial back their fear a little bit when they learn how to do that. Now I say, okay, let's say we're 3 months down the road. Now we're going to teach you how to do some barbell deadlifts. Is that similar to kettlebell? Almost the exact same motion, just a little bit different as far as, because you got a bar in front of your legs instead of a kettlebell between your legs.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I would still say I've been coaching for 16 years, lifting for 20 plus, but I'm still very novice at the barbell because I worked with kettlebells for so long. And then really just until the last few years when I wanted to do SFL and I worked with Fabio on it and got my SFL and Elite on there, I really fell in love with the barbell lifts. And it's like there's something that just feels different about having a bar in your hands. And I don't know if it's a different, maybe cathartic release on it of just being able to lift a little bit heavier load. But there is something that is so powerful about having a barbell in your hands. And it was the first time in my mind, I thought kettlebells were king forever, and then realized I learned so much more from doing body weight work and understanding how to create tension in your own body without any external load.
Right.
But then getting into the barbell and learning that system, it almost accentuated my love for strength, but really with this one particular tool, really more. But I can't really even put my finger on exactly why the barbell feels so much better in some things than the kettlebell. Maybe it's just that you can push the load a little bit more. I don't know if you have a take on that.
Almost infinite. Yep. And then that's one of the things that always excited me about barbell, probably more so than kettlebell, is that remember the first time I benched 405, which is 445s on each side. And I just sat there and looked at the bar for just like 20 seconds before I even did the lift. And I'm like, wow.
Right.
Granted, when I lift, the plates are very tightly put in there, but just seeing that kind of weight on there, or when I first squatted 745s on each side, I'm like, I'm going to do that, and it just, obviously you don't see it when you're doing lifting because in a back squat, it's behind your shoulders. But again, it's just like, wow. And so the bar bends a little bit. It's, there's a picture of me, power when I benched 535, and I can actually see the bar bending a little bit. I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah.
And that's a powerlifting bar. So those bars don't bend very much. You have to have a lot of weight on it. So that's cool. So I'm pushing it up, the bar's bending outside my hands. I'm like, that's cool. So, I mean, I've always been amazed at that. I've always been involved in strength. But kettlebells, if it's like, for example, if you're a beast tamer, where you got to press, pistol, and pull up a 48-kilo kettlebell, that's amazing feat. I can do 2 of the 3. It's just that pull up is, I tell people I'm pull up challenged.
Yeah.
Whereas I can do pistol and do the press, no problem. But, it's amazing watching that. Or when the women do the 24 kilo, it's just, I'm always in awe of watching them express their strength in those 3 fields. And I'm just like, it's like, wow. And I'm always honored to be one of the judges when they do that at the certs, and congratulate them when they get it. So it's just an amazing feeling. But, so strength has always been, even watching World's Strongest Man.
Yeah.
Or watching the Arnold Strongman competitions. Those things always amaze me, even though they have some rules that are not allowed in powerlifting still. It's just, when you see Half Thor from, where is he from? Iceland?
Sweden? No, he's from Iceland. Yeah.
Yeah. When he, pulled, was it
It's like 500 kilo.
502.5 kilos, which is like yeah, it's like 1106 or something like that. You know, he'll do
Yeah,
some but still he's 6'8".
6'8", 430 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, still, it's like I mean, it's still 2.5 times body weight on there on it.
Yeah.
I remember when Eddie Hall did it the first time. I think he was the first one that did 500 kilo
Right.
on, and it was watching that. I'm like, this is the most insane thing I've ever
Oh, I
seen.
know.
Brett had a line on that he might have said it on the podcast, or it might have just been in a private conversation about strength. And he fell in love with barbell squat. He's like I can't have a squat bar around, otherwise I'm going to squat it. But he said kind of the same thing with bending nails, like bending work. Said there's something about when the iron gives way to your strength that is just, it's a different type of feeling. And I didn't know exactly what that meant until started doing some high bar back squat in there. And high bar feels better for me personally than low bar on there. I think it just might be hip architecture, but there is something to that. And as people talking, like, you don't need to have 7 plates on the side to feel that. It could be, 1 plate, or build that up, but there is something to get the technique down and testing it in that low rep work that is just a little bit different. And I think kettlebells can give you that same feeling, but there is something different. Maybe that's a personal bias, but I've had other conversation with people on the same thing. Practice both. I think they'll definitely, benefit you there, but there is something about that barbell that is just special, man.
Oh yeah. In my gym, I think I have like eight barbells there. They're most for powerlifting. There's a safety squat bar. There's a what do they call it? I think they call it the Duffalo bar that Chris, what's his name, gentleman?
Chris Duffin, yeah, from
He owns
Kabuki.
that, but it's a predecessor to that. So it's a bent bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just amazing all the different barbells they have out there, and yeah, so I've been very blessed to be taught by some really good people when I was 18 how to power lift, and was able to excel in that sport as well too. So
Yeah. So I want to get into anatomy a little bit with you now. So on it. So if we're looking at the thing I'm fascinated by is the kettlebell snatch in there. And it's like, I think the swing is fantastic. I'm on a sinister journey right now. So a lot of heavy swings that I'm
good
doing.
luck.
Yeah, thank you. It's progressing. But on the snatch is the one movement that just felt the most total body, to me, of like, it's just very athletic. There's so much going on. What are the muscles and the tendons that are working in the kettlebell snatch specifically? And is there a specific sport or activity that you think translate the most by doing a heavy program of kettlebell snatching?
You mean where kettlebell snatching will help the program? You
Yeah.
mean? Okay.
Yes.
Well, kettlebell snatching, I mean, as I'm sure you well know, we have the 100 rep snatch test in Strong First to become level 1 kettlebell certified. It's interesting because I told Pavel many years ago, I said, when I did the kettlebell snatch, that was when I was weighing 275, but the kettlebell was 24 kilos. Now it's 28 kilos. But still, it was literally, and not to brag, it was almost a toy weight because the percentage of the weight to my body weight was very small. Whereas, did you have to do the 24 kilo?
I still do the 24 kilo. I'm on the cusp. I'm a lighter guy, so I'm on the cusp of the 20 and 24, but
okay.
I've always done the 24.
So when you do the 24 versus me doing a 24, it's different for our bodies. It's not a very
slightly different. Yes.
Yeah. We still got to do 100 reps. So I told Pablo, I said, why don't we just have the big guys do the 48 kilo, 10 reps on the right side, 10 reps on the left side, set the bell down. And he goes, no, doc, that's not fair. I said, well, okay, whatever. But I mean, give us some more, some stress there with physical stress. Kettlebell snatch works. I mean, it's to me, it's a kettlebell swing and you turn the volume knob up to 10. So the kettlebell swing might be at 5. You can make the kettlebell swing very hard. But I would actually turn it up to a 10 with that because it's a vertical projection of force, whereas a kettlebell swing is more of a horizontal projection of force. When you do the kettlebell snatch, you need everything you need as far as good hip explosion, as far as to extend the hips with your gluteus, and your hamstrings and your core. But you also need fantastic shoulder mobility as well, too. Because you know as well as I do that if I'm lacking in shoulder mobility and I go to raise my arm above my head, to be able to get to that position, I usually have to extend my lower back even harder to be able to get the arm up there, even though the lower back is not intimately involved in getting your shoulder up to above your head. So obviously you need to have that aspect. So if you have someone that's listening to this podcast that doesn't have good shoulder mobility, I'd work the arm bar as far as thoracic mobility strongly there. Worked as far as the kettlebell pullover that we teach at the SFL. But then also too, I would actually work on all the mobility aspect to help with that. And then eventually get to the point where they can start doing that. So the snatch is an exercise for, I would say for intermediate or advanced people.
Mm-hmm.
Should be able to learn that. Because as well as I do that when you get the bell up there, having that bell come around your wrist is an art.
Yeah.
You have people who bang it against their wrist, and that's not going to be good for the long term. So they definitely want to be able to get that aspect there. So it takes a little bit of time to get there. But the kettlebell snatch is a great exercise. Matter of fact, there's some study, I think it was done by ACE, a number of years ago, and they wanted to measure the EPOC, which is basically oxygen consumption after you're done exercise. So as you're breathing heavy afterwards, and how long does it last? And they measured that the kettlebell snatch was very equivalent to cross-country skiing uphill.
Yeah.
Now, when you think about that, cross-country skiing is usually done on flat ground.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to cross-country ski up a hill? But the people who do like cross-country skiing in the Winter Olympics, people who compete in that sport or year-round, they have to have that ability. So literally they're almost like running up a hill with skis on their feet. And so the amount of energy required to do that was equivalent to doing a kettlebell snatch.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'm probably missing some of the details with that, but just if you want to look up, just look up an ACE and then snatch and then EPOC, and those three words will probably get you to the study you want to look for.
Yeah, I remember seeing that study a while ago, and I think one of the things I'm most fascinated by it is I didn't realize how challenging cross country skiing is. I think those athletes have like the toughest conditioning of anything aside from maybe a cyclist doing the Tour de France. Like it's a really challenging
Yep.
sport to go into. It seemed ridiculous to me at the time of like that's the one, but no, that is the one that requires the most endurance on all different fronts, to get into. So have you played around with the half snatch at all of, dropping it down to the shoulder before dropping it from the top?
No, I never done that.
Yeah, I started doing that maybe a year or so ago, having many conversations with Tim Allman when he was doing all his work with just going deep into the snatch and keeping that vertical position and like that close to the body seemed like it just elevated to another level by just, dropping to the shoulder first, like into a rack position
Right.
and then dropping down. It was just a little bit different of keeping that close body to avoid that bang on the wrist.
Right.
But it's like when you get that, when you learn the snatch and you really feel good and it's like and you feel like, oh, it's like hitting the barrel of the bat in baseball. You're like, oh, that's how it's supposed to feel. Oh, that's really fun. I'm
Right.
going to try and do that at all times.
Yeah, so I use that when I teach students how to do the kettlebell snatch because I want them to be able to get the kettlebell up there, but I don't want to teach the eccentric aspect of it. So we'll drop into the rack, and then usually the next session we'll start working on the down part because well as I do when you teach the kettlebell snatch that a lot of people tend to almost throw the kettlebell away from their body,
Mhm.
and then they actually end up doing a lot more work than they have to. And if you have to do 100 reps like that, you're going to wear out your lower back, your hammies, your core, and basically wear out your body as far as being exhausted, doing that extra work there. So teaching it down in the rack position and bringing it down teaches them to keep it close to their body. So then when they go to actually doing the down phase as far as the kettlebell snatch, they are not doing the rack position, but they're close to the rack
Mhm.
position. And so they're able to emulate that and they get in a better, safer kettlebell snatch.
Yeah. Do you think the swing versus the snatch debate, obviously I know the answer is going to be it depends on here, but if you were going to pick one for conditioning, kind of working with somebody on speed or acceleration or power, do you think one maybe has a slight advantage? Technique aside, like somebody has good technique on both, would you pick one versus the other for somebody maybe more so than the other?
Yeah, I would use a kettlebell swing
The swing.
in that regard because when we teach at the level one that we teach the eccentric or the you always have an eccentric, but it increased eccentric. So that's when I put my hand on the bell and I push the kettlebell down, and then I can have them maintain that same speed for the last couple of reps without me pushing the kettlebell down. So
Mhm.
you can work on that aspect. But I would say for more of a beginner to an intermediate kettlebell lifter, that I would say probably the swing better. But
Mhm.
once you learn how to use your body around kettlebells, then I'd say the kettlebell snatch takes over. because when you learn to not only get the bell up there, but then when the bell's up there, you're pulling. You're not allowing gravity to take it down. You're pulling the kettlebell down. You're increasing as far as the hip hinge, which then increases as far as if you're doing vertical jump, the counter movement part. So when someone jumps up to the ceiling, they actually bend down to a hinge and then they jump up. And by doing that more explosively, you get more benefit for the gluteus, for the hamstrings, the core. You also get a bit faster kettlebell snatch. So that's why when I was training for my kettlebell snatch, I was actually timing myself to the point where I could do 10 right, 10 left, and I could do it. My fastest was, I think, 36 seconds.
Okay.
For 20 reps.
That's moving.
That's very much moving, yes. Generally, it's about 2 seconds per lift because a lot of times it's 40 seconds, 20 reps, so about 2 seconds per lift. But when I actually was actively pulling it down very fast, I was decreasing some of that time for it. So it took 4 seconds off for 20 reps. Not a whole lot, but still it's enough to increase the speed, but then it also increased the conditioning because then I was definitely breathing heavy at the end of that.
Yeah. I used to say I had to do the test unbroken. Like I did not want to put the bell down. And now just years down the line, I was like, that is 100% ego talking. I will put that down whenever I want to. Just got to get to it in a 5-minute, stint, like always trying to push like sub 4 and stuff. It's fun. Like it's a cool thing to pursue and work with of getting in. But no, if you're just going for the test, just, do it in the easiest way possible. The test is challenging enough.
Well, Mark Rifkin said something to me after I did my first snatch. No, but my first snatch test was interesting because that was when you had to do, for my body weight and the kettlebell size, we had to do 74 reps. It was, you could never set the bell down.
Oh, the one hand switch.
And you could only do one hand switch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that was interesting because being a power lifter, prior to that, my forearms were designed to lift heavy deadlifts. But for like what, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and set the barbell down.
Muscle endurance is a little bit different.
Exactly. So my forearms were about this big out from my forearm. After I got done, I couldn't even use my fingers were like this. I couldn't even use my hand. They were so cramped up there. Now when we went to the 100, Mark looked at me one day and says, "Doc, why don't you just turn it into like a powerlifting set?" So what are you talking about? He said, maybe do like 5 sets of 20 or do some kind of break it down to individual sets and set the bell down and rest. And I'm thinking, set the bell down? Wait a minute. He's got a good point there. So I designed a program, and being a former engineer, I like math, I like numbers. So I designed 5 sets of 20, and basically I set the bell down and then I'd rest to the top of the minute. And then I'd just do another set of 20. And it was interesting when I did my last snatch test, I got to 80, set the bell down. And so at that point, I got about 1:20 till 5 minutes are up. People were in my ear, "Don't set the bell down, get it up." And and at that point, I'm feeling tired, but I don't feel exhausted.
Yeah.
So at the top of the when 4 minutes hit, I just picked it up, got it done, set it down at 4:40. So I did every set literally 40 seconds. And I had 20 seconds. I got done. I didn't feel wiped out. I didn't feel exhausted, And so there was a guy who didn't set the bell down. He got it done like in 3:38. He was hauling. And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, congratulations, but guess what? We both got the same reward."
It's
Good point. So again, and I used to coach track and field. And so when you have kids go out there and run the 400 meters, they always would go out from the start line like a bat out of hell.
Yeah.
And I said, "No, you can't do that." Now, in the Olympics, you do that. But we're at the Olympics here. We're in high school. We're in junior high. So you want to go out about 80%, and then the last 100 to 150 meters, you want to turn it on and go faster. Because when you went out full blast, usually around 150 meters left or so, the big bear would jump out of the woods and jump on your back. Your legs felt like you had like iron or lead.
And it comes quick. Yeah.
It comes quick. And then you're coming across the finish line almost like you're walking because you're so exhausted. So that's why I look at it this way. I want to be kind of a more even format with that.
Yeah. So I saw the most impressive snatch test I ever saw was Tim Schumann. I assisted with him down in Florida, and Tim's a big guy, and this was when they were using the 24 still, for the big guys, and it looked like a toy in his hand, and he just gradually just flowing through, and he had like I think 10 reps left, and it was at like 4:30 or something like that, and he like put the bell down for a sec, like shook it out, I think got some chalk, and I'm like what's he doing? Just picked it up, easy peasy. And at like 4:59 just hits the last rep and then just drops down and walks away. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that is the most smooth, like knowing your program right there.
Right.
And I never forgot that of looking at it. It's like, oh yeah, you use all the 5 minutes if you have to of
Well,
just rolling. Yeah. So people hate counting. I do the weirdest snatch test. I do 15s, 12s, 10s, 8s, 5s.
you're one
So
of those people.
I'm
I
one of
see.
these weird people on it. Yeah. 15 and 15, 12 and 12, put it down. 10 and 10, put it down. 8 and 8, 5 and 5, close it out. But anybody that's counted for me on there, it's like, what did you just do?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I know. It's like, it just, for me mentally, it's just like easy. I know the next one is a little bit lower and then just drop it down and then just, kind of roll from there. But yeah, everybody's got a technique or so, especially if you've done it over a period of time, from it. First one, you're all adrenaline and you're kind of, pumped up and you want to do more. But once you learn it a little bit more, you realize 5 minutes is a long time. Take it all.
Yeah. Well, and you planned your work, then you worked the plan, and so that's your work. So someone may look at you going, "What is he doing?" But you've worked that plan. So that's why I always tell you when you go to do a snatch test at a certification, make sure your plan to work is done, and now you need to work it. And that's one of the reasons why. This comes more from my powerlifting background, but I've never ever have done a full snatch test in my gym ever. I did it at the certs, but I did a 2 minute snatch test, did a 3 minute snatch test. I
Right.
did like a 3.5 minute snatch test just to test my timing of my I said like 40 seconds per 20 reps and to get my timing down. So when I had to do the full 100 reps, I was ready to go. Just like in powerlifting, I never ever maxed out in my gym. I
Mhm.
always did at the powerlifting meet.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
Go
having faith in your training.
approach it like a work set, like going
Right.
in, punch the clock
Right.
and get it done. With the work that you did with the book, you mentioned like the outside the leg swing and stuff like
Yep.
that and saw the benefits of it. Did you look at anything like some of this staggered stance work or anything like that as far like some of the I've seen some things with like some athletic based stance and stuff like that and doing some ballistic work. Did you look at anything like that, like staggered stance swing or anything like that?
We did not we taught in the book the single leg deadlift,
Mhm.
okay, the kettlebell with body weight, single, double kettlebell. But then as a regression, we taught the kickstand deadlift.
Yeah.
So that's in a sense a staggered stance there. So for some people who either have a balance issue with being on one leg, they can go ahead and do it. So they have one foot back behind them on their toes, and so they have both feet on the ground. Just that one foot is flat footed, the other was on the toes underground. We did not do any ballistics with it though. We just did as far as the deadlift aspect.
Mhm. That kickstand deadlift, I think, is one of the most underrated exercises out there for people. Because I think the single leg deadlift is great, but some people specifically as beginners or like early on with the balance aspect of it, they're focused so much on the balance that they lose the technique. That kickstand seems like it just gives a little bit extra support so you can really get into more of that unilateral load on that
Right.
side. I've used that with so many people over the last year, and it's become more of like a staple exercise. It's one of those that I think is just we kind of, oh, you learn this, okay, now we're going to go to the next one. It's like, no, I think you can actually load this with a pretty decent weight and stay on that for a bit, and you're going to get a lot of benefit from it.
I've had some athletes that come from a local college here in town who are track athletes who have had hamstring issues. And if you ever notice about like sprinters, a hamstring issue usually is a symptom. Usually the cause is something further up the chain.
Mhm.
It's like hip, pelvis, lower back issues there. But still, I use a kickstand deadlift as a. It's not totally unilateral because you have one foot on the ground, you have both feet on the ground. But I use it as to focus more strength aspect with it. So, for example, let's say in their weaker leg, I'll have them do one set in their stronger leg, then go back and finish the second set on their weaker leg. So in a sense, they do 2-to-1 sets with that to help build that leg back up and strengthen it. And then when they're both are equal, then they can do either bilateral deadlift or still do the kickstand, or we can teach them a single leg deadlift.
Mhm.
But initially, at first, we would need to do that aspect. So the kickstand deadlift is a great exercise by itself. It's a regression, but it's not a negative word in that regard because like you said, it's a good exercise by itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. No, I like that. So, well, in the time you originally wrote the SFL manual and you've been coaching and teaching certifications for this for a long time. Since the beginning of when you first wrote the first edition of that, has it evolved? Have you guys changed things in the manual over time? If so, like what were the changes that you made, maybe from your own experience, or wanted to emphasize certain things a little bit more in the curriculum?
Oh yeah. So in the first manual, Pablo and I wrote that together in 2012, 2013. So I used to be the only person teaching the SFL in the world, and then eventually taught Fabio, and then Jason Marshall, and now Jeremy Layport and Sean Carnes do it as well too. But I used to have my original manual with me, and then I decided to, when again being always a student, I learned things at the cert, and so I would say, okay, well, this works, but then we're going to add this. Let's add this or change this. So I took a red pen and I'd make marks as far as like being like an English teacher, even though I hated English in high school. But I would take a red pen and make marks in there. So it got to the point where the first manual actually had more red ink than almost black ink. And so then we created the second edition of the manual. And so we modified some of those things, and then the third edition and stuff like that. So now the edition that's out right now is the most advanced edition with it. So it's got some definite changes with it. Nothing as far as the basic list, but just some things. So for example, during the kettlebell press, or sorry, barbell press, have people put their hand on their belly button, and then I want them to do an active negative with their hand. And I ask them, I say, now what happened to your belly button? My abs contracted. Did you purposely try to contract your abs? No, you didn't. And what I was trying to tell them was that by doing the active negative, you basically turned on the light switch on every muscle in your body to contract while you're doing that, but you did not purposely tell your abs to turn on. So I want them to realize that you're not just doing a shoulder exercise, especially in a standing military press. You're doing a whole body exercise. Yes, the primary muscles are the deltoids and the triceps and your traps and all that kind of stuff, but you're still using everything from the rib cage down as being contracted very strongly in an isometric aspect to help stabilize your spine.
Yeah. Going on that with the military press, which one of my favorite things to do, would you use a barbell versus kettlebells for any particular reason, other than maybe you just need more weight than like a kettlebells could offer from there? Are we working something really different with the barbell versus the kettlebell?
Well, you are a little bit. So someone who has a mobility issue, let's say, for example, doing a barbell military press, both hands are on the bar. As I press the barbell up, a lot of times, especially if you have poor thoracic mobility, again, we mentioned earlier, you'll be extending the lower back harder. And so you lose your abs and you'll be hurting your lower back potentially. With the kettlebell, let's say you have that shoulder mobility or thoracic mobility, doing a single kettlebell press will sometimes be more advantageous for you. As you say, behind the scenes, you're working on your thoracic mobility to help as far as to decrease that, so that eventually you can move to a barbell lift. So even says that in the SFL manual, if they cannot do a barbell press, then have them do a single kettlebell press, and then you can move to a double kettlebell press, then you can move to a double barbell.
Got it. Okay. So in your time now of teaching, you've been, teaching now as a master instructor for so long in both barbell, and kettlebell. With the candidates that are coming in and people who are coming in for maybe level one, is there a difference of how people come in? Are they more prepared now that there's more information out there a lot, or has it changed much? Have you seen from like the people who are coming in and are interested in becoming instructors?
Oh yeah, well, most definitely. I mean, when I took my first kettlebell certification in 2006, I think it was before we had running water and electricity.
Yeah.
Sorry, little joke there. But we had a lot of students at that certification who may have touched the kettlebell for a couple of weeks before they came, and they learned a ton. Nowadays, we have students who come to the certifications. Their form is good, they're ready to go, and we need to tweak them just a little bit. So the students nowadays are better prepared than they were ahead of time. Even the SFL, people are more prepared for it because one, there's more SFL instructors out there, so they can hire them, such as yourself, to be able to train, to be able to get ready for the certification. When we first started in 2013 and we went to Italy for the first cert, and the second cert was one in Tucson, Arizona, there were a lot of people who didn't know about some of the movements. And so now the names are out there. And I basically applaud as far as CrossFit, even though I don't necessarily like a lot of CrossFit's teachings as far as how they teach stuff, but they're the ones who kind of brought barbell back into the popular fold. For example, at the USA Powerlifting Raw Nationals, there's more people. There's like 500 people that are competing. When I left powerlifting in 2005, there may have been 100 people. So
Wow.
barbell has become more admired and more liked and more motivated by people to do that kind of stuff. So again, now we have better students coming, both the SFL and the SFG, the kettlebell cert.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so great. Yeah, I started this journey with the RKC in 2010. And yeah, I mean, just the way that it's approached now is so different from back then. You know, not better or what, I thought it was phenomenal back then, but the attention to detail of each little individual thing in certifications. And, you know, I saw it from assisting in kettlebell, kettlebell certifications. But then when I went to SFL, just the attention to detail and the tweaks and the adjustments of the program it was phenomenal. So I say, and not just because you're here on it, I do have to give flowers just to the SFL program. Like, I think I was such a kettlebell focused guy forever, and I still love that work. I think it's a great modality, but learning the barbell and the system of strength inside that program only made me better at other things that I was doing as well. So I think if anybody is out there who has gone the kettlebell route and really understands the system of strength, I urge you to go and check out SFL. SFB, phenomenal too. SFL, really just how to really get that load underneath your body and learn how to manage it. It just brought me to a whole nother level. So thank you all that you do. Doc, I really appreciate you taking the time today and jumping on. Always have a blast chatting with you. And hopefully I get to see you sometime in the future.
Yes, I look forward to it. I'm going to probably talk to Nora, maybe come up there in November. So she doesn't know that. If you listen to this, you'll hear it. So, but again, yeah, hopefully we'll get together again, buddy. Appreciate
Beautiful
it.
People. So if people want to check out the book, kind of see more about what you're doing, what's the best place that we can go and direct them?
Humankinetics.com. Also Amazon obviously sells it. So they can go to those two places there. So
beautiful.
I recommend you buy it and then give me your glorious reviews when you do that. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Doc, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much for listening today. I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to the Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait. Go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.